Without a doubt, the insects that burrow into plant shoots, stems, and trunks are important and potentially significant damaging pests. All would be considered key pests as they can easily pose major risk of structural damage, death, or disease transmission. Borers are generally beetle larvae or caterpillars, though there are a few sawflies that have larvae that may also bore into plants. I'll use the elm borer as my first example of a round-headed borer. Like many in this group, the adults are quick to find recently killed and dying elm trees or elm branches. The females attach eggs to bark fissures, and the larvae burrow through the bark and begin feeding in the recently inactivated phloem and cambium layers. The larvae are typical of the round-headed borers. The thorax is generally round or slightly oval in outline, and as these larvae chew through the wood, their burrows are also round or oval in shape. The adults are called longhorned beetles because the beetles have antennae that are typically as long or longer than the rest of the body. Many longhorned beetles are medium to large in size and brightly colored. Because of this, they are highly prized by collectors. This is one of the groups that is traded worldwide. The pupae are formed in a chamber in the wood or under the bark. You can see the long antennae curled around the head and thorax of the pupa. When the adults emerge, they cut circular holes in the bark. Unfortunately, when dead elm branches are cut from a tree and hit the ground, the elm borer larvae or pupae are often exposed, and these are assumed to have caused the branch death. There are several species of pine sawyers in the genus Monochamus. All in the genus are large species with adults being 1.5 inches to 2 inches long, and the antennal span can be 6 inches. The adults emerge from round holes that are about 3/8 of an inch in diameter. When adults emerge, they chew on the bark and needle bases of live pines. After maturing their ovaries and mating, the females locate dead pine branches or recently killed or cut pines. The female chews an egg niche in the bark and inserts eggs. The larvae only attack dead or dying pine branches or trunks. Normally, ecologists suggest that these beetles help recycle dead pine wood. But the problem is that they can also transmit the pine wilt nematode. Nematode-infested trees die due to their vascular systems being clogged by the nematodes. These dead trees are attractive to the sawyers for oviposition. When new adult beetles emerge, the nematodes can attach to the beetle's mouthparts, and the nematodes are transmitted when the adult beetles chew on live pine bark. The Asian longhorn beetle is an important invasive insect that has been accidentally introduced into the United States 4 to 5 times. The beetle often is introduced when wooden crate material isn't properly dried or treated. This is one pest that can repeatedly attack a variety of hardwoods, but maples seem to be the preferred host in North America. The large adults are a shiny black with blue highlights and white spots on the wing covers. The antennae are also distinctively banded with white. The adult beetles tend to stay on the tree from which they emerged. They eat thin bark, mate, then lay eggs on the tree unless the tree dies. Repeated attacks can result in more than 70% of the xylem being eaten away. This makes the trees very susceptible to simply crumbling apart. The Asian longhorn beetle has been detected in Chicago, 2 places in New York City, south of Boston, and in a county east of Cincinnati, Ohio. Through USDA Forest Service quarantine and eradication programs, the pest has been eliminated from the Chicago and New York locations, and the Massachusetts infestation is close to eradication. The Ohio infestation is also within a year or two of eradication. Eradication of this pest has been possible because the adults don't move much and the infestations are easy to locate. The egg niches made by the females are quite visible from the ground with binoculars, as are the emergence holes. Infested trees are cut down and chipped. While there are insecticides that are known to kill the beetles and larvae, the insecticides are not 100% effective, so detection and removal of trees has been the plan of attack. Notice the cross-section of a branch removed from a tree that had been attacked for 2 to 3 years. The larvae eat the xylem but leave the vascular system intact, so the trees survive until they literally break apart. The oak twig pruner is a medium-sized longhorn beetle. The slender mottled brown beetles emerge in June and are active for much of July. Females attach eggs to branches that are about the diameter of a pencil. The larvae first burrow into the branch and mine a burrow in the phloem and cambium in a circle around the branch. This girdles the branch, and the branch soon wilts. The girdle is usually wide enough that the branch will break and drop to the ground. The larvae remains in the dead branch, feeding on the xylem and cambium tissues. The larvae make access holes through the bark to expel their frass pellets. Mature larvae spend the winter in the branch, then pupate and emerge the following spring and summer. The obvious control for this pest is to pick up and destroy the pruned branches. The genus Obera includes a large number of very slim longhorn beetles. Most mine branches of trees, shrubs, and even some perennial flowers. The dogwood twig borer is a relatively common species that attacks flowering dogwood. The adults emerge in June and lay eggs on small branches of dogwoods. The larvae hatch and burrow into the branch and get into the pithy core. Here they feed on the xylem and cambium. This feeding causes the branch to wilt and die. As the larva burrows up and down the stem, it periodically makes small holes to the outside where it pushes out frass pellets. Control is easy to accomplish by pruning out infested branches as soon as they are noticed and then destroy them. The flat-headed apple tree borer is a classic example of a flat-headed borer. The common name is kind of a misnomer, as this pest will attack a wide range of hardwoods, especially species that are grafted. The larvae are very flattened, and they normally make flat-sided burrows in the phloem and cambium of trees. Notice that what looks like the flat head is actually the prothorax. This has been flattened down and expanded laterally. The head is actually tiny and dark brown. The abdomen is very thin and slender compared to the thorax. The entire subfamily of buprestids, to which the flat-headed apple tree borer belongs, have this kind of larval configuration. The adults generally emerge in May, but adults have been found through October. They seek weakened trees or damaged locations. The females seem to like to attach eggs to plant callus tissues, especially that found at graft junctions of grafted hardwoods. As the larvae emerge from the eggs, they burrow into the bark and underlying sapwood from the bottom of the egg. The larvae make wandering trails in the phloem and cambium, leaving a trail of tightly compacted frass behind them. By November, the larvae are mature, and they then hollow out an oval chamber just under the bark in which to pupate. However, the larvae don't actually pupate until the spring. After 8 to 14 days, the adult beetle chews its way out of the chamber and makes an oval emergence hole. Mass attacks are rare with this species, but continued attacks can cause slow growth in infested trees. Recently transplanted, grafted trees are at highest risk of getting this borer, and preventive treatments are warranted. Really healthy trees seem to be able to encapsulate young larvae, which can kill those larvae. The flat-headed apple tree borer, Chrysobothrius femoralis, is our most common Chrysobothrius species in North America that attacks hardwoods. There are nearly 700 species of beetles in this genus found around the world. Many are brightly colored and others are dull shades of copper or bronze. In fact, the common name for the adult blue-breasted beetles is metallic wood borers and jewel beetles. Virtually all species have some iridescence, especially on their ventral surface. Chrysobothrius scabriopinus doesn't have a common name, but I find it commonly on dying or recently killed pines. While the flat-headed apple tree borer can occasionally be found on oaks, Chrysobothrius rugosipes is a more common borer. The genus Agrilus is very large, with nearly 3,000 species found worldwide and over 175 species in North America. The adults are very narrow in form and are generally between 1/2 to 1 inch in length. Many have dark iridescent colors, but others are bright green, red, or blue. The larvae also look quite different from the flat-headed apple tree borer that we just discussed. The larvae are still flattened, but their thoracic segments are only slightly widened. Also, the larval abdomen ends in a pair of spine-like points called the urogomphi. These spines and the mouthparts are often used to identify larvae to species. The redneck cane borer has larvae that burrow into bramble fruits and roses. The two-line chestnut borer attacks oaks and beech trees. Agrilus borers attack a wide range of trees, shrubs, and even some perennial flowers. Many attack small branches and others attack the trunk. Agrilus borers are famous for causing gouty growths on their host. When small, the larvae may be feeding primarily in the phloem zone, and the cambium will quickly produce new tissues in an attempt to repair the damage and reconnect the vascular bundles. The gouty growth often appears as winding trails on trees and shrubs that have thin bark. Attacks on thick bark trees are usually not evident, but patches of the bark can be raised. The bronze birch borer is a native species that attacks all birches, but is most damaging to the European whitebark birch. Native birch trees seem to be able to encapsulate the larvae and repair larval damage before girdling can occur. On European whitebark birch, the larvae often girdle the tops of the trees first, as the adult beetles apparently like the warmth of the sun and are most active in the tops of those trees. The adults are a fairly uniform dark bronze color. If not controlled, European birches are often killed in 3 to 5 years, as the larvae move downward after killing tree tops. Native birch species can also be killed, but usually only when the trees are planted in full sun, where they may be exposed to heat and drought conditions that weaken their vascular systems. As previously described, the bronze birch borer larvae are very thin and elongated, with the thoracic segments only slightly widened. The larvae can take 2 years to mature in northern North America zones and 1 year in more southern locations. Upon maturing in the fall, the larvae make a pupation chamber, but the pupa usually isn't formed until early spring. Notice that when the adult chooses its way out of the pupal chamber, the emergent hole follows the cross-section of the adult beetle. These D-shaped holes are generally diagnostic of Agrilus borer attack. The adult beetles emerge in June, mate, and feed on birch leaves for a week or so. Soon thereafter, the females begin attaching eggs to the bark of trees, usually in crevices, branch scars, or under flaps of bark. The emerald ash borer is also in the genus Agrilus, though it is an invasive from Asia. It was first detected in Detroit, Michigan, when many ash trees began to die and many had D-shaped boreholes. Since there is no native Agrilus beetle that does this to ash trees, the beetle was quickly identified. Unfortunately, because the adults of this beetle rapidly disperse when they emerge, quarantine procedures quickly failed. Within 2 decades of being discovered, this pest has invaded almost 2/3 of eastern North America. Since native ash trees have no defenses developed to counter Agrilus borer attack, repeated heavy attacks kill native ash trees within 3 to 4 years. Whole street tree avenues of ashes have been destroyed, as well as whole forests. The adults are quite pretty in the sun as they show up as bright emerald green. When the adults take flight, they often flash the dark purple of their abdomens. The life cycle of the emerald ash borer is virtually identical to the bronze birch borers. Larvae make characteristic zigzag burrows in the ash tree's phloem, then the phloem and cambium, and finally the phloem, cambium, and outer xylem layer. Since ash trees are ring porous, this mining girdles the areas where the larvae have burrowed. The larvae usually develop from July into October, at which time the larvae make a pupation chamber that may extend a bit into the bark. They remain as a prepupa in this chamber for the winter and pupate in the following spring. In late May into early June, the adults chew their D-shaped exit holes and emerge. The adult beetles feed on ash leaves for a week or more before they begin to attach eggs onto the bark of trees. This is important to know. We now understand that systemic insecticides applied early to kill the larvae can also kill the adults that are feeding on the leaves. The emerald ash borer will nicely illustrate some of the other ways that trees react to borer attack. When a deciduous tree is being killed from the top down and was pretty healthy, the root system will have sufficient stored nutrients for survival for a couple of years. One of the common symptoms that ash trees show is a flush of vigorous stems below where the borers have girdled the trunk. These secondary stem buds are buried under the bark, but they break and produce what is called epicormic growth. When massive populations of emerald ash borer adults have built up in an area, they can produce so many larvae that the burrows become completely intertangled and they continue their burrowing below the ground level. This finally eliminates the ability of the tree to send up even epicormic shoots. The bottom image is of a tree that was pretty heavily attacked, and you can see how the vascular system was effectively girdled by the overlapping burrows of the larvae, even though the larvae hadn't severed all of the possible phloem, cambium, and xylem. The two-line chestnut borer is an important Agrilus species that attacks stress or diseased oaks. It is especially adept at locating and laying eggs on small oaks that have been recently transplanted. We have even found it infesting oak trees that have been on nursery store lots into June. A single borer or two can cause a sunken area to form on transplanted trees, and this can look like a canker. However, the next spring, a D-shaped hole appears in this sunken area that discloses that it was this borer. This is one of the borers that I recommend nurseries and landscape managers to use a preventive application of a systemic insecticide for 2 to 3 years after transplanting to prevent this pest. Its biology is much like the bronze birch borer, except that the adults can remain active well into August. The honey locust borer is another Agrilus species that typically attacks highly stressed honey locust trees. It can attack branches that have been damaged or are being attacked by disease. However, like the two-line chestnut borer, recently transplanted honey locust trees are often attacked. I have seen dozens of trees that were planted around shopping mall parking lots, each with several borers. Like the oak trees, I highly recommend treating trees that have been transplanted for 2 to 3 seasons until they show signs of good root establishment and good growth. The oak twig pruner is another tiny Agrilus species that attacks small, pencil-sized oak branches. The adult females attach eggs onto branches, usually at a previous year's growth scar. The larva burrows into the cambium zone and quickly burrows around the twig, which also girdles the thin xylem zone. The girdled twig quickly wilts, and wind often breaks the branch where the initial girdle occurred. These brown twigs are called flags. The larvae feed on the tissues in the girdled twig and finish their development. Even when heavy attacks appear, there seems to be little long-term ill effects of the flagging. As stated earlier, there are hundreds of Agrilus species. The hornbeam borer attacks North American hornbeam trees, but rarely causes significant damage. However, it readily attacks European hornbeam, and it can be a lethal borer as those trees have little defenses against this pest. There are also lots of Agrilus borers that rarely cause significant problems. The hawthorn root borer is rarely seen, but has an interesting color pattern with pink on the head and pronotum. A really pretty species is the fleabane root borer. Fleabanes are a type of native aster.